right, now, how you doing? You good? I'm glad to be here. Glad to be back in Charlotte. Glad to see so many folks here. Glad to see Congresswoman Alma Adams here. We spent lots of time in D.C. Of course, I have the only black-owned news and information network in the country, Black Star Network. We make it a we make it a point to speak to the issues that matter to us. We don't waste our time with gossip, silliness, and stuff along those lines. It's enough of that crap out there. And so our goal is to constantly be about the issues that matter to us. When I say us, not just African Americans, but all people. It's always interesting. I have folk who hit me and they say, well, you target African Americans. I said, yeah, but that's not the only folk who watch. We were talking about some protests in West Virginia with the Poor People's Campaign. And one of the co-leaders in West Virginia was a 50-plus-year-old white woman. And when the interview ended, she says, Roland, before I go, I want to tell you that I happened to come across your YouTube channel and you were interviewing Reverend Dr. William Barber. And she said, when I saw that and I saw him talking about what was happening in West Virginia, I immediately called the office in West Virginia, and that's how I got involved in this campaign. So here was a white woman in West Virginia who had no idea about the work that we do, no idea about the work that Reverend William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign was doing, who came across what we were talking about, and the issues that we speak about on my show and my network resonated with her, and that's how she then volunteered. And the mistake that we make is that we don't always realize how far messaging goes. Mass media is called mass media for a reason. And it's a whole lot of folk who don't understand the power of media and how you might be speaking one place and you're reaching thousands and millions and you don't even know they're even watching or paying attention, which is why I say to many of my brothers and sisters who are in media, you must respect this thing. You must respect the microphone, and you must think about what comes in your head, what comes out of your mouth, because you don't understand who's on the receiving end of what you have to say. And there are a lot of people who don't fully respect it, and they say crazy things, and they make up stuff, and they will ask questions and make statements and don't have any basis of fact to back those things up. And I challenge them, and I've even had some folk tell me that, man, you know, I don't like how you stepped to me. I don't like how you came at me. I said, well, if you don't make stuff up, if you don't disrespect the microphone, I would have never said nothing. Because I've always operated in my career from a very simple philosophy. If you do good, I'll talk about you. If you do bad, I'll talk about you. At the end of the day, I will talk about you. I don't let folk come on my show and lie. I don't let folk come on. I love people say, well, man, why are you always interrupting some folks? I said, they start lying, I'm going to interrupt them. And that's because I can't let a lie stand, because if you are watching or listening to me and somebody lies and I don't correct them in the moment, you will then go, well, what they're saying must be true because Roland didn't say anything. And so I tell anybody, if you want to come over here, feel free. We can have a great conversation and debate, but when you start lying, you are going to get checked. And so that's just how I roll. And so I don't apologize for it because that's how we have to have folks with integrity and credibility when it comes to our business. I want to thank so many of you for supporting the show. We launched this show 5.5 years ago after TV One canceled, News One now. People told me it wasn't going to work. We launched with 157,000 YouTube subscribers. We're up to 1.19 million. We then 2021, we launched the network. We have 6 shows on the network, and we're building it. And our fan base has been tremendous. In those 5.5 years, our fans have contributed in excess of $2 million for the show. And the thing is, we don't send them hats or shirts or mugs or anything along those lines. I tell them every dollar is going back into the network because people appreciate information that is credible and real. And in this time, in this season, where we are seeing folks who believe in alternative facts, who accept lies at every turn, we've got to have credible sources where you can go for truth. And that's why my show is called Unfiltered, because that's how we roll every single step of the way. And so that's why we do what we do. Before I get into the main part of my remarks, I do want to say this here, and that is when it comes to this holiday, this is the federal holiday for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but I think we have to change our perspective in terms of how we approach this holiday, because the holiday is not supposed to be solely about him. When he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, Dr. King accepted the award on behalf of the movement. And the money that he received from the Nobel Peace Prize, he actually spread it out among various organizations. When my fellow Alpha brothers, when we led the building of the memorial, yes, it is the MLK Memorial, but it is symbolic of the entire movement. And we make a mistake when we make this thing solely about one individual, because there is no Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. without thousands upon thousands of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And then when you talk about this movement, again, we put the centerpiece on him, or a Thurgood Marshall, or on a Roy Wilkins, or a Whitney Young. And we often do the roll call of the black male pastors who were involved with it. But I need to remind people that he was the spokesman for the Montgomery Improvement Association. But if it was not for the Women's Political Council, if it was not for women like Joanne Robinson, do understand they were doing the work in Montgomery before he even arrived there. A lot of the heavy lifting that took place in Montgomery was done by that Women's Political Council. She was a professor at Alabama State College. They were there. When you talk about even that boycott, if you go to the network, you'll see my interview with Fred Clark, who was King's attorney. They sat in her kitchen and they sketched out what that protest would be. There is a book about their work. And again, we love talking about these other figures, but there's a book called The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It, the memoir of Joanne Gibson Robinson. David Garrow, who won a Pulitzer Prize for a book on Dr. King, writes the foreword. And in this book, he has the letter that she sent to the bus company 4 days after Brown versus Board of Education, calling on them to desegregate the buses. That was 1954. The boycott was 1955. So a year before Rosa Parks even sat down, she sent the letter. In the book, he shows the copy of the letter. I'm saying that because we make the mistake when we ignore the work of other people who are involved in this movement, and we give short shrift, especially to the number of black women who were the foundation of the movement. I'm not dismissing the work of any of the brothers, but if you really want to be honest, you cannot have a black freedom movement, some call the civil rights movement, without a Joanne Robinson, without an Ella Baker, without a Septima Clark, without a Constance Baker Motley, without a Diane Nash, without a Zernona Clayton, and on and on and on. And so if we continue to only focus on one person and ignore so many other people, then what we're doing is a disservice to the next generation. So my suggestion is this: for next year's essay contest, in the spirit of Dr. King, you should make next year's essay contest a focus on the women of the movement. So now what you do is you now force the next generation to have to do the proper research on all of those unsung heroes who did their work. And so we need to expand this holiday beyond him, and we need to include so many others who actually were involved in doing the work. I was contemplating what I wanted to speak from, and any time you speak, a lot of times folk have no idea, they don't remember nothing you say, and so I always make it a point to title what I speak about, or I will then, or of course, being in church, we say, allow me to tag this text. Now, clearly, some of y'all have no idea what tag this text means. Which first means, one, you likely have no experience in a black church. Two, it means that you don't go to church anymore. So if you have no idea what tag this text means, just lean over to somebody and say, what he talking about? And so I also do this because if somebody can't remember what I talked about, they can at least remember the title. So allow me to speak from the perspective of reclaiming the radicalness of Dr. King. Many of us are familiar with Congresswoman Maxine Waters popularizing the term, I'm reclaiming my time. I'm reclaiming my time. And what has driven me crazy over the years, and it has reached a boiling point, is when we have these annual events. Speaking of Dr. King, we have completely stripped him of the radical that he was. America, including Black America, has created what I call a civil rights mascot, who we trot out every single year and hold him up as somebody who just loved everybody and wanted everybody to get along, and everything was just nice and wonderful. We allow politicians, black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, straight, gay, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, to give quotes of Dr. King. We allow companies to post comments and post pictures about Dr. King. And when you actually look at what they are posting these nice, wonderful quotes, but there's nothing actually behind the quote. And then when you look at the policies that they advocate, the policies that they vote for, when you look at the lack of investment of these same companies, how can these people hold up Dr. King and praise Dr. King and literally have nothing to say about the agenda of King and the Black Freedom Movement? See, you can't divorce the person from the issues. You can't divorce him from the agenda. You can't cite a quote, but then don't talk about what the quote was about. And then what we've done is we've reduced Dr. King to 2 speeches, as if that's the only thing he ever talked about. In my home library, more than 1,000+ books. I have 8 volumes, red leather-bound volumes from Stanford University of their MLK project, where they actually put together all of his writings and his speeches. It's 8 volumes. It's more than 4,000+ pages of content. So he goes beyond 2 speeches. But even if we talk about those 2 speeches, what drives me crazy is when I go to Black History Month events and when I go to MLK weekend events. Well, it used to be MLK Day, then it became MLK weekend, then it became MLK Month. So really now between MLK Day and the end of February is like a 45-day process, which is fine with me because it should be longer. But what's interesting to me is I will sit there and I will listen to these people talk about the dream. And let me just say, I heard a little bit earlier, do me one more favor. Please, remove the dream from our mindset. Because, see, here's the problem. We focus on the dream part of a speech, but we ignore the reality of the earlier part of the speech. You can't talk about the dream, but ignore when he said America gave us a check stamp insufficient funds. You can't talk about the dream when you ignore when he talked about police brutality. You can't talk about the dream when he talked about voter suppression. You cannot do that. You can't skip the hard stuff to get to the aspirational stuff, because you can have a dream, but eventually you got to wake the hell up. You can be laying in your bed having a fantastic dream about living somewhere in nice homes and well-manicured lawns and taking great vacations. And when you wake up, you got to confront the reality of being broke. So I can't make my dream a reality unless I deal with reality. And then what we then do is we talk about his mountaintop speech. I love him talking about, oh, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land. That's 2 minutes of a speech he gave at Mason Temple the night before he was assassinated. But you can't talk about the mountaintop if you ignore the previous 41 minutes of the same speech. It's a 43-minute, 16-second speech where he is talking about the reality of the condition of African Americans in Memphis and across the country. In the very same speech, he is talking about how we must redistribute the pain. In the speech, he says, Jesse, what do you call it? He said, redistribute the pain. He said, the sanitation workers, they are enduring the pain. We now got to redistribute the pain to everybody else. In the same speech, he calls out the companies that are not doing business and not hiring African Americans. He name checks them. He says we must have an insurance in where we are buying from black insurance companies. He said where the SCLC deposits their money in black banks. He's laying those things out. He says in the speech that African Americans individually are poor, but collectively are wealthy. Calls on us to learn how to move together, to be able to respond together, to act together in one accord, to be able to change what's happening. Now, what he's talking about in 68 is exactly what they did with Operation Breadbasket, which was an initiative from the Reverend Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia. Sullivan tells King about Breadbasket, that concept. King says, come to Atlanta to present to SCLC. He comes to Atlanta, present to SCLC. Dr. King says, we're going to adopt the concept. They renamed it Breadbasket. He then tells Reverend Jackson, you're going to be over a Breadbasket. If you walking around today talking about Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push Coalition is an outgrowth of Operation Breadbasket. There is no Rainbow Push Coalition without Operation Breadbasket. And so Operation Breadbasket was an initiative where they challenged companies when it came to their lack of putting black products on their shelves. But they didn't just challenge them for products, they challenged them when it came to hiring, not just senior executives, but also entry-level jobs. Not just that, but also investment in black banks and using black-owned companies. Martin Depp, a white pastor in Chicago, wrote a book, and it's called Operation Breadbasket, an untold story of civil rights in Chicago, 1966 to 1971. This is arguably one of the greatest achievements of King and the SCLC and the Black Freedom Movement that we never talk about. What they did was they went after companies, and the reason you had your first class of African Americans who became millionaires and began to build companies because Breadbasket forced them to put the products on the shelves. And when they negotiated these deals, they forced them to invest money in black banks. They forced them to hire black companies. They launched boycotts against those companies who were not doing business with African Americans. And so if you look at the success of black folks in Chicago and Detroit and those places, it was because of the power of Operation Breadbasket. They used the collective power of protest to force these companies to change how they were doing business and how they were hiring our people. That is a radical idea. And that is somebody who was willing to use the power of his voice to change what was happening in this country. See, again, we don't talk about that king. We talk about just getting along and everybody nice. No, because Coretta Scott King said they killed my Martin when he started talking about the money. See, America didn't mind Dr. King talking about voting rights. America didn't mind King talking about, can we go into parks and hotels? But the moment America heard him discussing the money, then America changed. See, let's just not play this whole thing cute. See, this is the problem again when we have these annual ceremonies. In the last year of his life, he was one of the most hated men in America. The polling showed that only 30% of Americans approved of Dr. King. Black folks could not stand Dr. King. Why? Because the day he gave a speech at Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967, called Beyond Vietnam, that's when it was changed. And in fact, it was on that date that he stamped his death certificate. You can't convince me that he gives a speech on April 4th, 1967, calling out the war in Vietnam, and to the day a year later, he's assassinated in Memphis. Oh, that's a direct correlation to that, because America was scared to death of the moral leadership of Dr. King speaking out against the war in Vietnam. He says in Riverside Church that what we experienced by having that war, the funds that will go to that war, then will sap the resources that will be used for the war on poverty. And let me stay right there for a second, because we're here in North Carolina, and we're here in the South. And I got to remind some folk that when LBJ launched the war on poverty, he did not go to the Mississippi Delta. When he launched the war on poverty, he did not go to the west side of Chicago. When he launched the war on poverty, he went to white Appalachia in West Virginia. And what I need folk to understand, especially anybody who's white in this room or who's listening, when black folks have always fought for rights for African Americans, the quality of life of poor white Americans increased. Oh. If you want to walk down that path, we can talk about what happened in this state after the Civil War, when you begin to see African Americans elected to state houses in North Carolina and South Carolina, elected to Congress, elected to the United States Senate. What you then begin to see are those freed people of African descent instituting policies that begin to change things for people. You did not have, prior to the Civil War, state-financed education. It was those freed slaves who were elected to the state houses who changed how education was funded. James D. Anderson, in his book, The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935, lays out in his book that black folks had such fervor for education that in Memphis, 91% of black children were going to school, where in Washington, D.C., just 37% of white kids were going to school. He lays out that in the aftermath of the Civil War, days after the Emancipation Proclamation, days after the war ended, white abolitionists came down to South Carolina and North Carolina and Mississippi, and they came to say, we're here to help these freed folk to learn how to read. They didn't realize that 500 schools had already been opened in the aftermath of the war ending. In fact, if you want to talk about collective bargaining, meaning you are bargaining for rights, freed slaves bargained with plantation owners saying, if you want us to work on your land, you got to build a school at the same time. And what began to happen? What began to happen was broke white folks and broke black folks, because let's be perfectly clear, when you broke, your skin color don't matter. Broke is broke. If you can't eat and you can't read and you can't get a job, I don't care if you are pale, you broke. And I would hope that many of our white brothers and sisters today who are in that category will stop voting against their own economic interests, voting for folks who want to cut public education, voting for folks who want to cut a food assistance. And Reverend Barber told me a story when he was actually at a march here in North Carolina. He said a redneck with a Confederate flag draped around his neck came up to him in tears saying, Reverend Barber, you and I don't agree on much, but I got to thank you and the folks with Moral Mondays for fighting for our rural hospitals. I was at the state conference for the NAACP, giving the keynote for his last conference, and I met a group of white women from North Carolina. They said, I bet you ain't never met 5 white women from the hills of North Carolina who were founders of an NAACP chapter. Because what folk found out during Moral Mondays, what they found out was that what the NAACP was fighting for were the exact same things those same broke, poor, impoverished, uneducated white folks in North Carolina needed. They were fighting for education, fighting for jobs, fighting for health care, and they realized when you land in your bed and you are not trying to die, you don't care if that doctor is white or black or Democrat or Republican. When you can't eat, you don't care what they look like. So they realized that what they were fighting for were the same things that they needed. And so we're sitting here right now, still battling over Medicaid expansion, dealing with a political party that claims to be pro-life. But how can you be pro-life when you vote against Medicaid expansion? How can you be pro-life if you vote against providing food and aid to people who need it? How can you be pro-life if you say nothing or do nothing about black maternal health care, where in this country black women are dying, even financially well-off black women are dying at higher rates because of child care? I made it perfectly clear to most of my folks who are conservative, don't tell me that you are pro-life. No, you really are anti-abortion, because you cannot be pro-life if you refuse to say folk need a guaranteed income. You cannot be pro-life if you are against a living wage in this country and you want folk to work for free, and then you mad when they get assistance. And then you can't tell me you pro-life when you say nothing when a black man or a black woman is shot and killed by cops, and then you begin to dare say you don't show up, you're not present. I say, no, if you're going to be pro-life from the womb to the tomb, not just in the womb. That's the radicalness of King. And so what we've done is we've done a disservice where we continue to walk around throwing out quotes that have no meaning, not attached to policy. And what we do is we then allow the day to come. We come to programs and we have speeches and artwork and all of those different things. What do we do the day after? King always talked about that the event, the protest is one thing, but the action after that thing absolutely matters. And so if we say that we want to follow his example and that so many others and the folk who are out there doing the work, you got to deal with the question of what happens now. What happens now? How do you use your vote? Do you use your vote? And then what are the things that you actually care about? We're sitting here living in an age where in this state you have a party that has done everything it could to deny people of fundamental rights, that will use the power of the supermajority to make cuts to the poor, but provide tax breaks to corporations. See, for me, I don't understand how you can have one of the richest individuals in America on a football team, a soccer team, and using taxpayer dollars to finance stadium deals for somebody who's a multi-billionaire. Don't dare come to me talking about how you against welfare for broke folks, but you down for welfare for rich NFL billionaires. Those two simply don't go together. And again, I know somebody sitting here was like, man, why you got to go there, man? We love our football team, and that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is we're walking around every single day loving and making excuses for billionaire owners to become richer. And then when it's now a conversation on how to fund an education program or how to fund a food program, now it's a debate. I'm confused. It's no different than in Congress. It's amazing. President Biden sends a budget for the Pentagon. They add $40 billion and there's no conversation. Yet if we have a conversation about a $5 or $10 billion food assistance program, we have massive debate. Oh, I know some of y'all looking at me now saying, well, look, we got to have a strong defense. I understand in this state, it's a strong focus on military, but you can't say you love King if you refuse to recognize that he said there are three evils in this country. He said war, poverty, and racism. The fact of the matter is we are so quick to fund defense projects and ignore people who are starving when 30,000 Americans die on an annual basis because they are poor. And then what we do, we sit here, our loud politicians, we look down on broke folks. We listen to them say if these folks would just get their act together. But ain't it amazing when COVID hit, how we needed a whole bunch of them folk who were on the front line. It was amazing during COVID how folk had so much care and compassion about frontline workers, because see, the problem is when we are fine, we ain't paying any attention to those poor folks who are working at grocery stores, who are picking up trash, who are working in the hospitals. But during COVID, all of a sudden we realized how important they were. I'm unpacking all of this because that's the agenda of MLK. So why do we still talk about quotes and speeches but ignore agendas? That's a mistake that we're making. And so we can't keep saying, well, is his dream alive, if we are not saying, is his agenda alive? Are we fighting for those very things? If you actually read what he laid out, and this is where I'm also always challenging our organizations, because it bothers me when we run around and I see my Alpha brothers here, and I see AKs and Deltas, and I see Kappas and Omegas and Prince Hall Mason and Links and Eastern Star, and we have all of these organizations, but I'm constantly asked the question, what are we doing outside of our internal meetings? The Divine Nine spent its resources and its time organizing and mobilizing around buying out movie theaters for folk to see The Color Purple. Organized and mobilized to buy out movie theaters for folks to see Black Panther. When for The Color Purple, all you doing is making money for Warner Brothers. For Black Panther, all you doing is making money for Disney. But the question is, do we have the same orchestrated coordination for issues that are impacting our community? Oh, I know. Okay, so see, it's at this point where some of y'all like, well, that sound like you speaking, Brother Martin. No, it's not. Because see, again, you need to understand here. Here is King's book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. This is what he says on page 132. He said, there are structured forces in the Negro community that can serve as the basis for building a powerful, united front. The Negro church, the Negro press, the Negro fraternities and sororities, and Negro professional associations. We must admit that these forces have never given their full resources for the cause of Negro liberation. There are still too many Negro churches that are so absorbed in a future good over yonder that they condition their members to adjust to the present evils over here. There are too many Negro newspapers have veered away from their traditional role as protest organs agitating for social change and have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and the militant. Too many Negro social and professional groups have degenerated into snobbishness and a preoccupation with frivolities and trivial activity. But the failures of the past must not be an excuse for the inaction of the present and the future. These groups must be mobilized and motivated. This form of group unity can do infinitely more to liberate the Negro than any action of individuals. We have been oppressed as a group, and we must overcome the oppression as a group. So if you had a problem with what I had to say, then you were disagreeing with King. And so what that means is we begin to understand what is happening in this country, when we begin to understand the battles that we are involved in right now, when you literally have white nationalists and white supremacists who do not want to see advancement, doing all they can to stop it. When I see people making excuses for what took place on January 6, 2021, let me remind you that Donald Trump was constantly complaining about voting in 4 places: Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Milwaukee. If you ask anybody black, what does that mean? He was talking about 4 black cities. In fact, when they had a partial recount in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, it was only in Milwaukee. The top Republican in Michigan said, let's count all the ballots in Michigan except Detroit. And so what you saw really was a targeting of folks on that day because they were angry with how black folks were voting. That's why on the cover of my book, White Fear, I have a photo of a white man with his arms outstretched. He's basically saying all of this is ours. I know some of y'all looking at me saying, well, brother, that might be a little too tough. Really? Explain this to me then. How is it that North Carolina had one of the lowest voting participations in all elections until 2008, when in 2008, North Carolina had one of the highest voter participations of any state in America? Oh, by the way, what happened in 2008? Barack Obama won North Carolina by 14,100 votes. And what happened after Obama won North Carolina by 14,100 votes? Republicans in this state began to change the voting laws, and ever since then, y'all have been fighting, trying to go back to where you were in 2008. So how can the same people who fund the military to the tune of $890 billion talk about freedom, talk about our love for the military and fighting for what's right, but doing all they can to stop folk from accessing the ballot? That's because they don't want to see righteous people in place. That's why it was an abomination when you had a black woman who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who lost by 400 votes, and now you have a party that has a 5-2 control of your Supreme Court, and they are trying to pass laws that will impact folks in a negative way. That's why you have right now some folk who all folk who our skin folk ain't kinfolk. That's why right now you've got a deranged individual running for governor of North Carolina who is simply a sick and demented individual who has no business being anywhere the governor's office, who cannot articulate an agenda that speaks to all people, but he would rather kiss up to Donald Trump, who had the audacity and unmitigated gall to say that Mark Robinson Jr. is in the same vein as MLK. If anybody can say that, the only thing they might have in common, both wore black pairs of shoes, but I can't compare them in any other way. You will never ever hear me say MLK Jr., Mark Robinson Jr., they in the same category. You got to be stuck on stupid and outside of your mind. And everybody needs to understand, and I mean everybody, whether you black or white or Latino or Asian American, Native American, You have right now an effort being funded by billionaires in Washington, D.C. to enact what is called Project 2025. If Trump wins, these folks have made it clear they have studied everything that happened during his 4 years, and they made it clear they're going to simply just wipe all sort of stuff away. It is one of the most dangerous things that we have ever seen. They are promising retribution from the Department of Justice. They are promising to use the IRS to attack their enemies. They have made it clear that they're going to be wiping out thousands of people who work in the federal government. When you hear there's a fight for democracy, we had better understand that is not a simple, basic statement. It is a fundamental truth. So we can't be sitting here just focused and celebrating on this day. This has to be a day where you're using it to mobilize and organize. I made it clear. I was in Jamaica for 2 weeks of vacation, and I said, when I get back, we are on an 11-month focus for what we're doing. I don't have time for foolishness. I need people to understand that there are people who want to attack every single thing that has benefited African Americans, people of color, and white women. The affirmative action ruling by the Supreme Court by colleges did not just impact African Americans. Let me be real clear so folk in this room can understand. There's been no greater beneficiary of affirmative action in America than white women. That's a fact. Check any contractual program with the federal government, with states, with counties, cities, school districts. The numbers do not lie. But let me also remind folk, because this is where history somehow gets ignored. If you are a woman, largely a white woman today, and you are a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, an architect, and you had to go to the professional schools, you should be thanking black folks for fighting. Because we talk about Title IX and somehow believe that Title IX was only about sports. Y'all, Title IX had nothing to do with sports. Title IX was about opening the professional schools up to women who were discriminating. Check the facts. The explosion of women in those fields happened after 1972. And you might be saying, well, how does that impact black folks? Well, what's Title IX? Title IX is a provision of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Without the 1964 Civil Rights Act, there is no Title IX. If you are disabled in this country and you now have access to ramps and elevators, you might want to thank black people. Because the 1996 American with Disabilities Act is a provision from the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And if you are Latino, or you are Korean, or you are Japanese and Chinese, and you get to vote in your native language, you need to be thanking black people, because it's the 1965 Voting Rights Act that makes that possible. And if you are Latino or Asian or Native American and you are saying, I now get to live where I want to live, you better thank black folks, because that was because of the Fair Housing Act, also known as the 1968 Civil Rights Act. And if you are gay or lesbian and you love and appreciate that you can now get married, you may want to thank black people, because that's the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which was one of the three Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. And if you are sitting here recognizing that the insurrectionists should not be able to run for office, that's because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. What am I saying? Every single group in this country that has its civil rights and its fundamental rights has benefited because of black blood that was spilled from the Civil War, through Jim Crow, through the Black Freedom Movement. And so what I'm saying is, those rights are now being threatened, so we cannot have just black folks standing up. We need people of integrity and honor and courage standing with us, saying, I want my rights as well, and I don't want someone taking them from us. And that's exactly what's happened. You've got conservatives right now who are planning to launch a broadside against MLK tomorrow and the 1964 Civil Rights Act. They are angry because of those rights. You've got Ed Bloom suing the Fearless Fund, creating grants for black women and other women to start businesses when less than 2% of all venture capital that is spent in this country actually goes to African Americans. I need folk to understand that we are literally in the middle of a war, and as Papa Pope said on Scandal, too many of us are walking around with bombs going off and thinking we're dancing in a field of lilies. At some point, folk have got to recognize there is a fight truly for the soul of America, for the soul of North Carolina, for the soul of Charlotte. You have got to decide right now whether you want to be in this fight or you want to simply be an observer. Now is not the time for us to come in this church, celebrate King, have artwork, have writings, and say, oh my God, how he was wonderful, if you are not willing to do what he was willing to do. And that was to organize and mobilize and protest and strategize and push and fight and take the fight to them at every single turn. They were unwilling to back down from a fight, which is why black folks and white folks can sit in the same church at the same time and not be arrested. We need this generation to wake up and to understand you might have to take off your Hugo Boss or your Armani suits and take off your St. John and take off your Louboutins and realize you got to be in this fight, in this battle, because we cannot allow these folk to roll us back to the old days. And if you need to understand what it means, then my frat brother Vertner Woodson Tandy said it best: we will fight until hell freezes over, and then we will fight on the ice.